So for today's training, I am going to cover the new and updated features in this release. And then I'll share some new training resources and upcoming events. And if there's time after all of that, we can go ahead and address any outstanding questions at the end. So now this release included improvements to several different parts of the Everlaw platform, including Storybuilder and deposition workflows, AI-assisted review, transcript search, assignment and project administration, and a few export and results table improvements as well. So whether you're spending most of your time preparing for testimony or reviewing documents, maybe managing large reviews, administering projects, there should be at least a few updates in here that are relevant to your work. Let's go ahead and dive into the new features. So I want to start off with one of our biggest new additions to this release, which is Storybuilder deposition designations. So if your team works heavily with depositions, this is a pretty meaningful update. Everlaw can now give case teams a way to be able to mark deposition testimony for use at trial directly in Storybuilder, instead of managing that process outside of the platform. So in this release, Everlaw supports both affirmative and counter designations. You can organize them by party with color coding. And this kind of takes a process that often lives in spreadsheets and moves it into the transcript itself. So instead of tracking designations offline, teams can now review, create, and manage them right where the testimony lives in Everlaw. So let me show you what this looks like in practice. All right. So first, I'm going to go ahead and open Storybuilder from this quill icon up here. And one of the first things that you'll want to do is to go into the story settings to be able to configure your case parties. So such as plaintiff or defendant, you can add additional parties here as needed. And you can also change any party colors as well. Once you've set this up in story settings, then you can go ahead and open a deposition transcript. So I'll go ahead and move us over to the depositions page and open this deposition right here. I've already uploaded my transcript, so we are ready to roll. First, I'll point off that in this drop down right here, I can pre-select the party and also the designation type, which is going to persist as I continue to create designations. So I'll make sure that this is toggled on. And then I can go ahead and locate the passage that I would like to use. So I'm just going to go ahead and scroll this down here. And let's say that maybe I need to create a designation for this piece here. Once I found the passage, I've applied the designation, and then from here, I can go ahead and edit the party and the designation type if needed. And then I can also add a note if I'd like to. So the workflow is really happening directly on the transcript rather than in a separate process offline. You can also choose to import designations through this little three-dot icon. We have an import designation option. And you can use this spreadsheet template in order to import designations from here. So if you've already maybe have work that you've started offline, you can bring them into Storybuilder instead of needing to recreate everything manually. And when you need to take this work outside of platform, you can export your designations. So over here in this download option, I can click export transcript with annotations, make sure that I've got my designations selected here. And I've got a couple options. You can choose to export designations in CSV, PDF, or Word. The PDF and Word options include a color-coded transcript, and the PDF option also adds colored designation sidebars, which will make it a little bit easier to follow. And then back on the depositions page, if I go ahead and head back there, You can also choose to import designations across multiple transcripts at once from here, again, using this spreadsheet template. And you can also export across multiple transcripts as well. So you can select which deposition transcripts you'd like to use, selecting our designations. And this is going to be exported as a designation chart for the selected transcripts or selected designation types. All right, so staying in depositions for another moment. The next feature is support for LEF files. So Everlaw can now ingest marked exhibits and link them to transcript text directly from an LEF file instead of requiring those materials to be uploaded separately. So if your transcript package includes linked exhibits in an LEF file, Everlaw can bring in the transcript and exhibits in one process. So this slide shows kind of the key pieces of that workflow. On the left here is the upload step. You can now upload an LEF file from here. And then in the middle, once you've done so, the linked exhibits will appear in the depositions evidence panel. And then on the right-hand side here, the exhibits are added to the database as a process document set where they become searchable documents in Everlaw. So the result is less manual setup, faster access to both the transcript and exhibits. And if you would like to learn more, I'm going to go ahead and drop an article in the chat that covers the steps in more detail. All right, so now that we have covered some of the biggest brand new additions, let's go ahead and talk about some updated features. So I'm going to keep us in Storybuilder for just a little bit longer so we can take a look at a couple of important improvements. So first is kind of a quicker usability improvement. In drafts, you can now resize the right side panel by dragging it. This is a smaller update, but it is a useful one if you spend a lot of time writing while referencing testimony or documents or facts from the side here. This is a kind of a quality of life improvement, but I think it will be welcome for many people who use drafts regularly. So it gives you a lot more control over how much space you can actually give to your draft and how much space you can give to your source material. So it's going to make it easier to work without constantly kind of needing to shift around your layout. So this is a small change, but it does make a big difference. I can give more space to my draft when I'm writing and maybe more space to my material when I need testimony or document details visible. Next up, transcript search has gotten a significant upgrade this release. So if you've used this workflow before, kind of the biggest change is that there's now one dedicated place to search across multiple transcripts, review the actual hits with surrounding context, and export what you find. So instead of having to jump from transcript to inspect results, this allows you to see everything together. Keyword search and transcript Q&A also now live in the same place, so it's really much better version of a workflow you might already know. If you've used Deep Dive for transcripts before, note that the name and entry point has kind of changed here, but the experience is more unified and really much easier to navigate. So let's take a look at this on platform. I'm going to go ahead and take us back on over to our project. And this is going to live underneath the depositions tab here in Storybuilder. So if I click into this search transcript, here's kind of that dedicated page. So let's say that maybe I'm looking for a specific like word or phrase across these transcripts. I could type that in here. Let's say that I'm simply looking for the word meeting. I can search for that, and noting that you can kind of pick and choose if there's specific deposition you would like to look across. But I'll go ahead and click search. And then we can see in my results here that it gives me kind of the specific details of where it's pulling these hits from. And I could go ahead and jump into the transcript if I'd like to view that from here. And I could go ahead and export out information if I'd like to as well. This is also where I'm able to ask questions about a document. or excuse me, where I can ask questions about a transcript in Storybuilder. So rather than typing in like a word or a phrase or something like that, I could enter in a question and I could search for that. And it will look across my transcripts and generate a response here. And then we can see the kind of narrative response and information of where it's pulling this from in the transcripts. So now that we've covered kind of the story builder and deposition updates, I want to shift over to document review and AI. So the first feature to talk about is coding suggestions. So coding suggestions can now evaluate images, not just text. So for teams working with image-heavy data sets, this helps surface relevant visual evidence faster without changing how you already generate coding suggestions. So if your team works with a lot of photos or scans or maybe other image-heavy files, this can make reviews significantly more efficient. So let me show you what this looks like. Take us back on over to platform once again. And I have a binder with some images in it, so I'll go ahead and take us into that. And let's open this bottom one here. All right, so here we've got an image, and I've kind of set up like a simple imaginary workflow for today. Imagine that we're doing a review and we're looking for vegetation. So I've already generated some coding suggestions so we can kind of see how Everlaw has evaluated the image based on my criteria. So we can see here that it has returned a yes for a flowering plant. And if I look at the explanation here, we can see that it tells me why. The image clearly shows flowers, but it has returned a no for indoor or potted plants because there are no pots or containers or like indoor context clues. So you're not just getting a yes or a no, you're also getting the reasoning behind each one. And then you'll also notice that there's a relevant area link that you can click on for each of these as well. So that's going to kind of show you exactly where on the image that Everlaw found its evidence, so you can kind of see where it's pointing to. All right, taking us back on over to our slides, there's also a second coding suggestion improvement in this release, which is a new row-based CSV export option. So instead of packaging or packing multiple suggestions and rationales into a single cell, Everlaw can now export them in a row-based format, which is much easier to work with in Excel or a spreadsheet. So this is a smaller improvement, but a very useful one. The export is much easier to read and analyze, especially if you're working with coding suggestions outside the platform in a spreadsheet. And while we're talking about results tables, one last thing is that results tables now include an assignments column, which makes it easier to track documents as they move through different phases of review. So if you are a reviewer yourself, or if you're managing review progress, this gives you more visibility into where documents are or where they've been assigned without needing to jump elsewhere. And from here, I want to wrap up with a few admin and review management improvements. So the first is that assignment admins can now grant self-assignment permissions and configure batch sizes in one flow. And then you can allocate work by batch size with just a couple of clicks from here. So this is really about reducing admin overhead for large reviews. It streamlines setup and it makes it easier to get consistent batches out to reviewers. Project admins can now choose whether to send an email notification when adding existing Everlaw users to a project. So this is a very practical improvement. It gives administrators a little more control over communication and can help reduce unnecessary internal email noise. And then finally, Deep Dive now supports on-demand project enrollment. So admins can add projects later or move from partial enrollment to database level enrollment without having to decide everything up front. This gives more flexibility over time. So instead of trying to plan for every future need at the start, you can expand or adjust enrollment later as the projects evolve. And just to quickly note a few other updates, UK users can now use MDB transcript sync files. We've added some new MCP tools for programmatic workflows, and there are also a few minor visual updates across platform. You can take a look at the release guide that's linked in the Docs tab to the right of your screen to learn more about these features, along with everything else that we've covered today. I also want to point you to a couple of new resources and upcoming events. So the first is a new closer look video on Everlaw AI administration. This is really geared towards administrators. In it, you'll learn how to enable AI features, configure project and user access, and track AI credit usage across your organization. So if you're the person managing AI settings for your team, this is a really great walkthrough to help you feel confident setting things up and also keeping an eye on usage. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat so that you can find it after today's session. And then our second new resource is a quick start video covering designations. So this ties right back into Storybuilder deposition designations, which we looked at earlier. So this is a really great kind of fast way to get up to speed on how to mark deposition testimony for trial. If you want like a quick refresher after today, or maybe you want to share something with a teammate who could have joined today, this is a really great place to start. And I'll go ahead and drop a link to this in the chat as well. I also would like to flag our upcoming webinar series on Everlaw Productions. So this is a two-part series. The first session, which is setting up for a flawless production, covers project setup, building production protocols, and running and sharing productions. And then the second session focuses more so on QC, warnings, and modifications. Both are beginner-friendly sessions, so they're a really great fit if you have admin or production permissions. And I'll go ahead and drop the series registration link in the chat, and you can sign up for both at once. But this first part is happening on July 28th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And then the part two is happening on August 25th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. But thank you so much for your time today. If you have more questions or if you need additional support, just remember that in Everlaw, you can click the little question mark icon at the top right of your screen, and clicking View All Help Resources will show you contact information for the Everlaw customer support team, and also additional training resources. But thank you again so much for joining, and we hope to see you in another training session soon. Enjoy the rest of your day and take care, everyone.